Welcome back to Tipping Point. I'm your host, Kara McKinney. You know the saying, this is why we can't have nice things. Well, I have the perfect example of that for you in Atlanta, Georgia, where hundreds of teenagers descended on a Six Flags amusement park there over the weekend. Police officers were called for crowd control purposes as fights broke out among the teens and others ran wildly through the park, leaving a trail of mayhem in their wake. Eventually, someone began firing a gun, prompting cops to give chase and return fire, striking at least one 15-year-old, leaving them in critical condition. Here are some video uploaded online aptly titled "Surviving Atlanta Six Flags."
Knife on the stick, trying to get jiggy. They had found that boy alive, all of his body parts was missing. It's time to spin, let's go get busy. Some hanging out of the trunk, you breaking BK, come through the tree.
We as conservatives often lament the lack of outdoor walkable public spaces and how that atomizes communities, leaving people as individuals cut off from family and from larger community networks, and thus leaving them more vulnerable to predation by big government seeking to fill that void in their lives with cradle-to-grave control. But at the same time, we as conservatives obviously see how so many public parks, metro stations, and even amusement parks, when they are built, become hotbeds for drugs, violence, and trash. So what are we to do with this cognitive dissonance? It appears we have a much deeper spiritual and cultural illness that needs to be dealt with first before we think about the pretty trappings of what a thriving society should look like. And a big elephant in the room on that is absentee parents or parents who never quite grew up themselves, raising hordes of young people like we just saw in that video. And guess what happens if you're the poor cop or the park security guy trying to kick these kids out? You get their angry single mom in your face accusing you of being every name in the book, especially of being racist. It's the same with a lot of the carjackings and murders and mass retail theft being perpetrated by young people too. And typically mom isn't too far behind them in court demanding justice for a good little boy who had his reasons for doing what he did. It's insane. Just as insane as that story from the New York Post last month about how an estimated 1,200 homes in the Atlanta area are occupied by squatters, with some opening up illegal strip clubs on the property. But it's not just Georgia, as residents in California and now in New York can tell you, because the latest story is that an older couple recently bought a $2 million home in Queens so that they and their disabled son could be closer to family, especially in the event of their passing, so that their son could be cared for by his brother. However, the couple, Joseph and Susanna Landa, have not been able to move into their dream home despite closing on the deal last October, transferring their funds and paying all the utilities for the property ever since the purchase. Because it turns out some 32-year-old guy claims that the property is his. The squatter alleges to be the at-home caregiver for the previous owner who passed away a few months ago. He claims the former owner gave him the right to continue living in the home even after his death. And so despite the new homeowners having bought the property, the squatter called the cops on them for trying to gain access to their own home. The state of New York has a squatter's bill of rights which protects the squatter while the court proceedings drag on whether or not he can be evicted. While the Landas are complaining about the system being broken, journalist James Kirkpatrick argues instead, no, it's not. This is how the system is intended to work. Do you think our rulers are just idiots who don't understand that if you reward theft, you'll get more? They just like this behavior and want it to keep happening. And that honestly is the sad truth of the matter. And sometimes that means the only way out is through. You have to reach rock bottom before those who aid and abet the far left in their path toward destruction finally cry uncle and chicken out. That's what's happening right now in Oregon, where state lawmakers are busy passing legislation to recriminalize the very same drugs they had decriminalized only a few short years ago because somehow magically they thought they could use the money from legal pot sales and from less law enforcement on harder drugs to fund more drug treatment plans. Instead, the state experienced one of the sharpest rises in fatal drug overdoses in the nation, and their homelessness and crime crisis has exploded to even greater proportions. Turns out arresting people for meth and heroin actually reduces their use, whereas decriminalization promotes more of its use.